This podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not intended to replace therapeutic services of any kind. Please refer to the list of references provided if you need support.
Welcome, everyone, to yet another Sessions with Sara Cate and Ashley. I am Sara Cate.
I'm Ashley.
And today, I'm like hesitating, taking a sip.
Like
why am I talking when I'm taking a sip? Today, we are going to talk about relationships. And I do believe that had this session come out, or had we done a session on this when we first began, compared to where we are now, it would be a very different session, which I think speaks to the nature of relationships.
Yeah.
What we would have talked about 6 months ago in regards to being, and we're talking right now specifically about intimate partnership. What we would have said about relationships then would be, I think, quite a different episode. So I find it appropriate that we maybe start there with really naming how what's the word I'm looking for? Relationships evolve and they change, and every day there's new information, and every week and every month and every year and every decade there is new information for you about who you are in partnership and who you two are as a couple, if you evolve together, or if the journey takes you separate places at a certain point. But to really speak to the nature of how relationships evolve and they change and they transform. And there's a certain degree of flexibility that is required of you and of the relationship and of your partner or partners to evolve with relationship, and to allow yourself to be changed and to allow for your needs to change and your wants in relationship to change. And so I think just starting off there of like, this might be applicable to you right now where you are, where Ashley and I are going to be coming from, because we're coming from two different places and yet similar spaces to some degree.
That's a good way to put it.
But you know, to give yourself permission to let this kind of conversation land with you where you're at, and potentially it gives you a forward kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it can help you look down the road and say, how do I want to evolve with my partner, or how do I want to evolve myself in order to be more open and more flexible in partnership? If you are single, and if you are in a partnership, of like, where do we want to take this thing, or how do we want it to evolve with who we've now become? And also to look back and reflect maybe on where you've been and what has worked for you historically in the past and what hasn't. Because, you know, Ashley and I have not, well, I'll speak for myself. I have not been wildly successful in partnership. And yet I could say wildly successful. Like,
totally.
My divorce was a successful completion of a relationship that wasn't meant to carry on. So I think there's just a lot here for both of us. We are not experts in this by any means, and yet we do speak from our experience. And ours is ours and yours will be yours. And again, whatever resonates, let it land, and what doesn't, let it pass by.
Well, I think one of the things that I appreciate about the sessions that we have is I feel like we're having conversations and we're talking about things in a way that don't always get talked about that way. And like Sara Cate said something really important. And so I want to like go back to that.
I don't know if Old Blue just picked up my rewind sound. We really do need a soundboard.
We do. Well, we know what Ashley's doing today on Amazon. It'll be here tomorrow. Sara Cate.
Gonna be so many fun stuff.
So, but she said how your wants and needs evolve.
Mhm.
And she mentioned like yourself, like she also talked about like you and your partner, like what you want the relationship to be. But I think if we back it up and peel away everything else, the most important thing is that we recognize and we acknowledge and we accept that our wants and needs are going to change, and that isn't right or wrong. That's just life. That's just how this works, and that it's okay. And it can be such a beautiful progression of growth within yourself. And it doesn't mean like, this doesn't mean that if your wants and needs are changing, you just like throw in the towel and just burn everything to the ground. Because we don't even know when you start to like get 10 steps ahead of yourself.
I may have had a breakdown this morning to Ashley before we started this. Mind you, folks, it's 8 a.m. So I got a little ahead of myself, and Ashley talked me off the ledge. Thank you.
Well, no, I didn't. I mean, I really didn't say anything. I just asked her if a couple things were actually true. But when we
Future tripping's real.
yes. And so I think, okay, so like when you're this anxiety that can come from the future, because we don't have a guarantee.
Yeah. Yes.
We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so we can have this like view from 30,000 feet of like this like roadmap of what we want our life to look like and what we want our relationships to be. And I think that we need that. I think we need to know like, okay, what do I want from a relationship? How do I want to progress in this relationship? However, that's like a blanket, that's like a general, we don't know the exact path that it's going to take. And that's where the growth, that's where you get to really find out like all of those little things about yourself along the way, is when you're allowing the path to just be like carved for you instead of being in so much control that if you take one step off of that path that you've laid down, because that's how your life is supposed to be, or that's how this partnership is supposed to be, that creates a big rift within yourself first. And so connecting back, well, it's like 5 minutes into this and we're already talking
and we're gonna come back to self.
But it has to start with yourself. It has to start within you. It has to be, what do I want? What do I need? Is it being met first from myself? And then how am I going to then take that into partnership? And so you mentioning that, like she mentioned that immediately, how important it was for you to check in and know what your wants and needs are, and to know that it's okay when those change.
Yeah.
Like that's period. Like that's the most important part.
Yeah. Well, and it's knowing yourself enough to know when those change, right? Like it's doing a check-in, like something that, my partner and I have talked about from the moment that we really started dating, was having a really conscious conversation and like essentially check-ins, and being on board with doing those check-ins frequently. Have met later at a later stage in life, right? Like I'm 38, he's 40. And so we're meeting after a lot of relationship experience. And so coming into this, I think we both had an awareness and have done a degree of our own work that we know what it can look like when you self-abandon, or when you don't pay attention to what your needs actually are, and resentment builds. And if you ignore needs, and if you hide your needs, and if you shame your needs, and you're trying to be in partnership, that partner is never really going to be able to fully step towards you or support you if those needs aren't communicated.
Right.
And it does, I think the number one thing I witness in my practice with people, and even within myself in previous relationship, is that I wouldn't speak my needs. I wouldn't name them. And then I would weaponize that resentment against the person and be like, oh, they just couldn't show up. They really didn't. But I also was not being self-responsible to say, hey, I'm here and I'm in this relationship and this isn't good for me. This doesn't feel good for me, or this isn't working, or I need more of this. And to some degree though, in my earlier, like my 20s, I didn't know what the hell those needs were, because I wasn't, again, going back to conversations Ashley and I previously had, I wasn't allowed to have them. So the better part of the last decade has been Sara Cate really diving into her internal world and it's been gnarly and it's been uncomfortable to recognize that I have needs, to recognize that I'm going to have to ask for that. Like my partner isn't just going to know what I need or how it needs to be. I need it facilitated. Like I have to have the roadmap to my own emotional well-being and landscape in order to hand that to him and say, here's actually what I need in this moment. When I'm feeling this way, when I'm feeling overwhelmed or stressed, this is how I need to be cared for or nurtured, right? Like he can't just come up with that himself because he is living through his life experiences, through his perspective. And something that I do want to name here that Ashley actually said to me before when we were kind of jiving about what we were going to talk about today was that it has to be two partners willing to be at the table or partners willing to be at the table. Like it can't just be one person saying, I have these needs. And then the other person being like, cool, what do you want me to do about that? Like it has to be two people willing to be, if it's a monogamous relationship, it has to be those two partners willing to sit down and say, okay, we're both here and I have to listen and figure out what you need from what you say. And you have to be willing to listen and figure out what I need from what I say. But the first relationship in that is, as Ashley was saying, is paramount, is the one that you have with yourself, because that is how then you design the map for them to follow in loving you. And that will change.
Yeah. And well, what she's talking about is having agency over yourself.
Yes.
Having agency over your whole being, which means, because you're going to have wants and needs in physical realm, in emotional realm, in spiritual realm, in mental health realm. Like you're going to have different, like every little pocket of your life there's going to be little different things, different information that you gain. And as that changes, if you're unaware, there is no amount of work that your partner can do. There is no amount of quote showing up that they can do that is going to satisfy you. If you're unwilling to know yourself, if you're unwilling to speak what you want, what you need. Yeah. And here's the thing, even when we are speaking and like able to say like, okay, this is what I need from this relationship. This is what I want. What we're saying is like, we're telling someone how we want to be loved. That person doesn't have to accept that. That person gets to decide if they can give that. And that's, I think, where we run into, in our society, we run into this like, because what we're not saying is that it's like it's me, and I get everything that I want and I get everything that I need. And if they can't do it, then they're shitty people. That's not what this is. It's two people or however many partners are in this relationship. And this is true. I mean, we're talking about intimate relationships, but this is also true
across the board.
Yeah. Is if you are sitting at a table with these people who you're in relationship with, and you're all bringing your wants and needs to the table, and you're negotiating what that looks like in this relationship. Because if I think that the 5 love languages can give you some information. I don't think that it's law.
Yeah, it's not absolute.
And it's unfair if somebody has a really, really hard time showing love in one of those 5 love languages, for me to barge into this relationship and be like, well, I only feel love if it's physical touch. And so you have to all of a sudden change who you are to show me love with physical touch. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about changing someone. You can't do that. You don't want anybody to change you. You can't expect somebody to change just because you say you need these things. But what it is you all come to the table and everything is laid out, and then you figure out that road together. And it's a swing back and forth.
Yes.
It's a flow. Yeah, there we go. I was like making this like movement with my hands.
Were saying flow.
It's a swing.
Her brain was saying swing. You can have that swing.
Yeah. So
I mean, okay. I have something I want to share when you're done.
So it's this flow, and you get to, this is also the really exciting thing, is when you enter into a relationship. So brand new relationship, right? When you're there, when you guys are first talking, you're like building this relationship, right? There's like, you're both asking questions, you're both giving, you're both figuring out like, okay, what are fun things we can do together? Okay, what are like the things I enjoy doing this? Yes, like you're like getting all of these new things and it's exciting and it's, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then as the relationship progresses, I think we put a lot of pressure on the other person to then just automatically know.
Mhm.
And in the beginning, you're like showing, I don't want to say like your best self, but you're showing sometimes a certain parts of yourself, right? Like when you first meet somebody,
Right.
it's not like with some people, right? But oftentimes we're not like, okay, here's all of the deepest, darkest
my
secrets and
vulnerabilities.
yeah. Like we're
Yeah.
not like, that's not usually it. And so when those deeper conversations start to happen, I think sometimes we fall into this thing of like, they automatically should know how to care for me and that it's unfair. And think about if you're in relationship with somebody and you're expecting them to show up for you
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's like perfect for you, but you don't even know how to do that for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much that can be, there's going to be some rift.
Well, and I think that's what causes Ashley. This is what causes the pain of when relationship ends.
Yeah.
Because if we rely on the other
Mhm.
person to be the giver of love, the soother, the nurturer, the caretaker, to fulfill all of those things for us.
Mhm.
If we are not first doing them for ourselves, we are going to feel empty.
Yep.
If and when they leave.
Yeah.
Right. Like
totally.
Relationship ends.
Yeah.
And that is more of an absolute, it's either through a completion of the relationship or death, whatever it might be, but relationship will eventually
Mhm.
ultimately end. And that, that is the emptiness that follows, the loneliness, the longing that follows can sometimes be less intense
Mhm.
if we are fortified within our own caretaking.
Right.
If we are fortified within our own nurturing, if we know how to soothe and care for ourselves first, and then we offer that information in partnership to say, okay, here's my heart and here's how it needs to be cared for. And this is what I'm asking of you. And I think that, inviting our partner into that space of like mutual exploration. Because even if you don't know, it's because I hate that bullshit. Let me be very clear. I think it is bullshit. When someone says you have to be whole and ready to be in a relationship. Fuck that noise. It is absolutely not true. And whoever is out there selling it, I'm speaking to you directly. Stop it. It is unfair. It is unkind. It is shame-based. Because we are not meant to be complete and whole as adults if our entire lifetime we have not been given tools or supported in that practice.
Well, we're not, to be quote whole,
right,
is just like a made up thing. Like we're here to experience life, and if we reach like full enlightenment, like
why are we here?
Like
we're just gonna become stardust at that point.
Like, yes,
we just float away when we
yes, yeah.
It's not an appropriate thing to say to somebody like, oh, you just weren't ready to be in a relationship.
Yeah.
I was not. I will be very clear. When I met my partner, I was still deeply in my healing process. But the relationship that I had been focused on was the one with myself. And I had been working on healing that. And we're facilitating a stronger dynamic to my own intuition and to my own essence. And so when I met him, I could come towards him in a way that I felt like I knew myself, but I don't know myself in relationship to him. I don't know, because he has his own experience and lived life. And so two people coming together, to Ashley's point, you're going to have to learn each other, and you're going to have to, he's going to have to understand who Sara is in the world. And I have to understand who he is in the world in order for us to kind of facilitate a stronger conversation. And so, and there might be misses and there might be confusion around that, because I'm, again, though I am very deeply aware of myself, I had, bless his heart for sticking around, but like I had very undiscovered wants and needs that like until situations played out in our dynamic, I have not been able to then articulate and go, oh, wow, actually in this instance, I needed more of this. And I didn't know that. I didn't know it until the situation arose. And so rather than coming to him being like, oh, you're not meeting my needs, I had to step back and go, I didn't know what they were actually. Now I know what they are. So I can say, hey, in circumstances like this is a way that I will feel really cared for. Right. And we can, and that's what, and to have an attuned partner who says, okay, I hear you. I see you. I will honor that. Right. Like again, where Ashley said, it takes two people willing to come together. But and so I think circling back a little bit to like not changing our partner, not going into it saying, okay, like I see who you are, but like also you could be better. And so I'm going to love that version of you and think that I have some role in getting you there, when really it's our own self-responsibility of our evolution. I cannot ask my partner to evolve and change. That is for him. That is his. I can only focus on how I evolve and change, and then bring that to him in partnership. And then we decide together, is this something that we are still going to pursue? And there is something that's, I want to read quickly. It's from, there's the Instagram handle Rising Woman. And I really, really love this. And I think it's really pertinent to what Ashley and I are talking about. It says, we aren't here to tear down our partner's walls by harshly psychoanalyzing them or demanding they show up. We are here to lovingly call out the ways our partner hides in relationship and to invite them into their hearts in a way that they can say yes to. The narrative in conscious relationship is that you should always accept your partner exactly as they are. But there's a difference between, I love this, there is a difference between accepting them as human beings and challenging them to bring their whole heart to you. Yeah. Good distinction there. A truly conscious relationship is one where we hold ourselves accountable and also take the risk and speak unfiltered yet loving truth. We all have things to work on. It's not reasonable to ask them to change who they are. It is okay to ask for behavior or energetic change. And then I love this. It says, remember that if you're going to call your partner forward, you have to be willing to be seen by them too. Ooh, that one gets me. Yeah. Wow. But it's just an opportunity to be in deeper relationship when we say, this is who this person is, and this is who I am. And how do we find the ways to love each other? And how do I invite him closer to me, and how does Sara go closer to him in that behavioral exchange? It doesn't mean that we're going to heal each other's childhood wounds, but we can walk through some of those unmet needs in partnership. And again, that though requires a degree of self-understanding of how was I wounded, and now how, if I am in a safe, healthy relationship, whatever that means, but like a dynamic where my partner is willing and present to then ask for those things.
Well, and I think this is like, again, like everything we get about relationship growing up is not this. We're not given support around communication. We're not taught how to communicate through some kind of breach in your relationship contract. And we're especially not given communication for how to repair. And of course there are of course there are things that like could, if they happen, they're probably the end of the relationship. Right. And that's different for everybody, like where that line is.
Yeah. The non-negotiables.
Yeah. But when there is some kind of break, when there's some kind of conflict, the communication around the repair, we're not taught that. And when you think about it, think about examples in your life, like parents, grandparents, friends, sisters, brothers, their partnerships. Think about how many partnerships you can name around you. If you're lucky, you have one that you can think of where you can see them conflict resolve, and which helps them grow closer, right? It helps them grow in this relationship. It helps bring their relationship forward. Oftentimes we don't see that, and resentment builds,
hurt builds.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden we're then stuck again in this, like, you know, there's a conflict, and now we've lost this person in this moment because they're, you know, upset with us, we're upset with them, whatever, there's a conflict. And now we've lost this person who we were kind of expecting to parent us, to be our lover, to be our friend, to be our therapist, to be all of the things. And now we've lost that person. And so we're like spinning, like, what do we do? When instead, this person is a human being. They're a human being that you have decided to be in an intimate relationship with. They're not your mother. They're not your father. I hope.
That is a whole nother episode.
They're not your therapist. For the love of God, they are not your therapist. And I think, like, we are not, like, it hurts my heart to see so many people in these relationships where it's like, if their partner isn't giving them this thing, it's like, that's what we are human beings. We're meant to be in community. And that looks different for everybody, but we are meant to have people around us. Sara Cate just said something earlier. We were talking about how, like, a relationship between two women is completely different than a relationship between a woman and a man. And that's so true. There are just things that you're going to get from certain people that you're not going to get from other people. And that's okay. That's how it's supposed to be. And so to walk into a relationship and expect that that person gives you everything, you're setting no one else up for failure but yourself. And like a true, like, you're just not honoring who you are as a person when you do that.
Because you're dynamic. You know, Ashley's speaking to, like, how dynamic we are and how we need to be met in many different ways.
And we deserve to be met in different ways.
Totally. And so, like, our partner, if you're in a monogamous partnership, like, they're not going to fulfill all of those roles, and the expectation that they will is what leads to rupture, to Ashley's point. And like that conflict resolution, that repair, we often didn't have. Like she was saying, we don't have the language for it. We don't have the language to repair those things. And like, where trust is built in relationship is through the repair. It's like rupture is kind of imperative. It's an important part because we have to watch our partner be able to name and acknowledge the ways that they've hurt us and take ownership over that, and vice versa. We have to take ownership over the way that we are human. Like it was saying in here, accepting somebody as a human being is different than asking for behavioral change. Like if someone's behavior is somehow triggering or hurting or rewounding a part of you, you get to say, hey, when you go radio silent for 24 or 36 hours, I have an abandonment wound that gets triggered. Is there any way that you could potentially just like check in once in that time? Right? That's asking for behavioral change. That's not saying you don't get to have your space. I need you to be with me all of the time.
Or even inviting the conversation of like, hey, I noticed you go radio silent for 24, 36 hours.
What is
curious, like what comes up for you in that time? This is what I experienced. What do you experience?
What does that give you? When you have disconnection for that long, what do you feel? And, and
here's where, if that person is like, I need my solitude, I need whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's not like you don't have the right then to ask for like a check-in or like a whatever, but that's where you get to decide, this is what this person can give. This is where they're at. And that's awesome. That is great. They are exactly where they're meant to be. Can I come to the table with what I know now in this relationship? I think, bless you.
I wanted it to be quiet.
I think, okay, so Sara Cate and I both really love Esther Perel. And if you don't know who this person is,
look her up. We will tag her in our show notes, because she is the couple's relationship queen.
And she talks a lot about, there are many different interviews that you can watch of her on YouTube. And one of her common themes, one of the common things that comes out in her TED Talks and just interviews is the concept of when you're in a relationship with somebody, you can, again, we're talking about intimate partnerships here, but like this is across the board as well, but that you're not in the same relationship throughout the time, throughout like the physical time that you're with that person. And she speaks to, like, she always says that she's had about 3 different relationships with her husband, with her same husband, 3 different relationships. And I think it's a really interesting concept because, again, here is something that we're not taught. It's not talked about. It's kind of talked about like you get married and you're with this person forever, or like you're with your life partner forever, or you're in a relationship with people for however long. And it's just like, there's no other discussion. It's like, hey, you want to be together? Yep. Great. End of discussion. Cool. Now you're just like connected to this person. But what she speaks to is how over time, as wants and needs change, as you're in different times of your life, you're different people. Yes, of course you have like the same, like some of the same internal characteristics, but I think we can all see that over the span of your life, if you were to stay exactly the same, there's probably not a whole lot of joy, not a whole lot of experience, not a whole lot of life happening, right? That would mean you're like sitting on your couch, watching the same TV show every day, all day, and nothing changes, right? Like that's not what life is. We're meant to be here and evolve and experience new things. And when that happens, naturally, we're going to change. When we're 20, we have very different things going on in our life than when we're 50, right? And so we're not the same person. And the person who you're in partnership with, they're experiencing all of those changes too. And so we've mentioned this a couple of times, but like, here's where the renegotiation of that like little contract that you have between the two of you, it's like you're sitting down at the table and you're like talking about the changes. And it doesn't mean because somebody's life is different, right? This person that you're in relationship with, they're now experiencing different things. Maybe it's their wants have changed. Maybe their needs have completely changed. Maybe they just went through a really traumatic experience and they are forever changed and something really has happened. Here's where you guys get to, if we allow it, there can be communication and a renegotiation of like what the dynamic looks like. And it can grow into something just as beautiful as before. It doesn't mean that then it's over. It doesn't have to. And sometimes it might mean that it is, you know, if somebody just isn't there anymore, then like, we're not saying like you just work through everything, you know?
Right. And you were speaking, like there are certain non-negotiables. Right. There are certain things that are not okay or unhealthy. And like, we do not have to fight through things that are harmful to us. And you know, if 2 people are willing, if we're talking about, again, a monogamous relationship, if people are willing to evolve and change together, that's one thing. But oftentimes for me in my practice, you know, since I work with individuals, mostly it's one partner in therapy doing the work and one partner averse to it and not interested in therapy and not interested in shift. And that creates a structure that over time kind of disconnects the relationship because you no longer are journeying in the same way. And, you know, we're going to evolve and we're going to change, like Ashley's saying, and like,
and change is good.
Yeah. And to recommit, you know, to recommit and not even recommit, like, because recommitting to some degree means going back to something that we no longer are. We no longer are the same person we were 5 years ago. So we can't really go back. Like when couples say we have to go back to where we started, I'm like, yeah, but that's not that you weren't who you were when you met. You have learned and lived way more life experiences. So you two meet now.
And it's like a rediscovery.
And do who the 2 of you are now. Are those 2 people interested in a relationship with one another?
You know, it's interesting because we mentioned too, like the relationships end, you know, whatever the reason is. It doesn't always have to be something like it's the completion. Sara Cate mentioned the completion of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot about this because my partner and I, we have reconnected. So we were in partnership before.
That's really sweet.
And we were super young. I mean,
Yeah.
we were very young, and it was
How old were you?
so fun. We
Can I
met.
ask that?
Yeah. We met when I had just turned 25. And was fresh out of school. So all I knew was like school. All I knew was you wake up and go to class and do homework forever and take a million tests and write a bunch of stupid papers. And then I was like in the real world, and I was like, well, what do people do with their time?
I'm an adult.
Yeah. Like I don't even know. I was like, hobbies. People have hobbies. Like, what do you mean? Like, people do things. Anyways. So we met and we spent 4 years together, and our relationship ended because he was brutally honest. Which at the time, I mean, the truest form of like broken heart that I've ever known. Oh, it's okay.
I know. I know. It's just like I'm loving that Ashley. You know, like just thinking about her in that moment.
Yeah,
like,
it was. I mean,
hard.
it was so hard. I mean, like, couldn't get off of the ground, crying heartbreak. You know.
Yeah.
Wow, that was intense.
We love her. Expecting her love.
Yeah, for sure. But he said, he was like, you know what? And I like think back to this all the time because it was so mature of him. Did I want to hear it? Absolutely not. But now I'm like, damn, well, okay. He knew that he could not be the partner that I needed. And he said that. He flat out told me that. He was like, I cannot be the partner that you need. And I knew that he loved me. He knew that I loved him. And
who you were at that moment.
Yes. And I also knew that he couldn't be the partner that I needed. I wanted to love the person that and it's not even that he could be, because he had to discover some things for himself. He was on his like self-discovery journey, right? And I was like, I want to be along for the ride. And sometimes we have to do it alone. Everybody's different, right? But he was in a space where he needed to travel this journey by himself. And he was right. I shouldn't have been there. It would have caused resentment. It would have caused a lot of extra hurt and pain that didn't need to be there. We probably would have ended and never spoken to each other again. And we spoke throughout the whole entire 6.5 years that we were separated. We talked. He was still a friend. He was still somebody that like I cared about and I could count on, because I knew that he could be honest with me. And there were a lot of conversations in between those times about certain things that would happen in our like individual lives that we would speak about, where like I didn't have to like worry about him like sugarcoating things, right? I didn't have to worry about him just trying to like appease me or like, you know, whatever. It was that challenge. Yeah, it was that challenge of like, okay, you're feeling this way. One, how can I support you? Two, here's like some challenge that you can do for a behavior change, or for like, hey, have you looked at it from this perspective, blah, 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 all of that. And when we got back together, when we reconnected on that intimate level, it's still sometimes like so kind of, it's just kind of wild, because it's like, yeah, I've known him now for over 10 years. And it's like, yeah, that's like, it's still him. It's like still that same person, but he's also such a different person now. And who we are in another 10 years is going to be totally different. And that is like exciting, because I don't know what he's going to discover about himself. I don't know what I'm going to discover about myself. And we get to have this continual, if we choose to check in and continue along this path, like we get to choose to continue to allow each other to continue to discover themselves. And that is like, I think when you think about like a safe relationship, we all have like our different versions of what that looks like. Again, there's going to be some non-negotiables, but when I think about safety in a relationship, the safety that I have in this relationship to continually discover myself and be able to bring what I discover to the table and share those things is like the most special and the deepest and the purest form of safety that like I've ever known. And that is something that like before, right, when we were realizing and when he realized that like he needed to take a step away, that wasn't there, you know, and that was okay. Like the relationship, we weren't fighting every day, you know, we weren't purposely hurting each other at the end of the relationship. It just was like, it wasn't right. It wasn't
for that
time of who we were. For those two people, it just wasn't where we were meant to be in terms of like living life together. And so that change, that shift, like I've seen it happen of like, here we are, like this whole new relationship, the same people, all of our differences, and we have negotiated this relationship where we're both fully present as individuals first, and then fully present as a couple.
Yeah, I have goosebumps. I mean, just like how sweet to allow the story to evolve. Though.
Yes,
like
totally. And in that time in between, well, let's just say that Ashley met a lot of people. Not a lot of people, but the relationship that I would enter into weren't really beneficial unless you're speaking of like learning things about yourself. Yeah. Like
they've given you information.
Yeah. Like
However,
when I say like
humans
weren't
necessarily
the most
supportive.
Yes. Like they
Otherwise
weren't.
you'd still probably be in a relationship with them.
Exactly. Yes. And so there's been another, like, this is like one of the things that I and Sara Cate have talked about this multiple times on like in many different conversations is when you have these situations that like for partnership aren't beneficial in terms of like the two of you renegotiating these contracts as you go and like growing together, both of you coming along together, when that's not beneficial, you learn the things about yourself. But what also happened was I allowed myself to kind of get used to not having this or not allowing myself to speak what my needs and wants were. And so then when I'm met in a relationship with a partner who is allowing that to happen, my system went through a tumultuous season because I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to showing up and having somebody else show up and then having feeling something and be able to speak it and not being told that it was like a waste of their time or I was being dramatic or I was too sensitive or like blah, 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 blah. When I'm just like saying like, hey, I'm feeling this way. And so that threw me and I had to really like, that's where I can't expect him. He can be there. We can talk about it, but that's not his responsibility to fix that for me. It's not his responsibility to be my therapist through it. It's not his responsibility to just like mother me and do that work. It's my responsibility to figure out like, okay, what does my system need? And how
do I ask for that?
And how do I ask for that? And how can I show up in this relationship and accept then the care that he is willing to provide? And I think that we don't talk about that. We don't talk about how, if we're used to something, if you grew up in a very tumultuous, traumatic environment, and then you have a relationship with someone, whether it's a friend, whoever, who shows up for you, how hard that can be because our nervous system just is so used to the opposite. And I hope, I mean, I know that other people experience this too. and so
I may have cried about that this morning.
I do actually. Like as we talk about this, my hope is that there is this deeper understanding and compassion for that part of you because it's really hard. It's really hard to go through that season of recognizing that like, oh my God, I've been in these relationships where I really wasn't seen or heard or respected or whatever it is. and how awful, how beautiful that I can be now, but how much that person that wasn't seen needs love, that part of you. that
Right. Like
needs-
you give
Yeah.
grace and compassion to the part of you that was in the pattern.
Mhm.
Like I have been in I've been in the pattern. I like the pattern. The pattern feels familiar for my nervous
Yeah.
system of like, just don't have needs, just shut
Yep.
them down and then be resentful.
Yeah.
And
And then that's how we
then
choose
leave
partners.
a relationship.
Yeah. Mhm.
You know, so like we have these parts of ourselves that have historically gone unmet. And so they're gonna, our nervous systems are going to pull us towards things that feel familiar
Yeah.
and relationships that feel familiar.
Mhm.
So, giving yourself, to Ashley's point, that compassion in that way of like that is a part of you that sometimes feels known. And this goes back to even like the healing fatigue. Like sometimes we just do the thing we know because it's easier in a moment when we're exhausted and we're fighting so hard. And I will tell you, relationship is one of the most dysregulating things for my nervous system.
Mhm.
And it has been so much work in coming back to this space, after a huge break, after a huge trauma through divorce, and then a huge period of my life where I was committing to myself, to come back towards this thing. And so wherever you're at in your journey, Ashley's and her partner took space and took time, regardless of if it felt like right at the moment or felt important in the moment. It was unconscious, right?
Yeah.
But it was everything that they needed to evolve and come back together. And to me, going through really young relational trauma and then coming out on the other side as this very independent, autonomous person, and then having to learn how to show up in a relationship very differently at, a middle stage of life, wherever you are in that process, single, partnered, whatever it might be, to give yourself permission to ever be evolving in that role. Because even when I was single at 28 looked very different than when I was single at 36. So like I was a different human in both of those ways. What I needed in my aloneness and my singleness was very different. Like we are consistently learning information, even from those shitty, I'll just name it, shitty relationships. Sometimes we learn something.
Yeah, totally.
We gain something. And I don't believe everything happens for a reason, like I said, but I do believe pain can have purpose for our own learning and our own evolution. And so, our encouragement to you in having this conversation is to give yourself that space and that freedom to evolve, to change, and to recognize if you are not in partnership, how to really learn to build that roadmap of self-understanding and self-care and self-connection, which is something we've talked about on every session. And if you are in a relationship in a monogamous, polyamorous, whatever your relationship definition is, to be able to give yourself permission to evolve in that, and maybe invite some check-ins in, invite some curiosity in, invite a relearning. You can evolve together. Before we close, I just want to give this little story that one of my favorite bands, their name is Over the Rhine. They have been making music together for, I think now over 25 years or something like that. And they, about 15 years ago, maybe, had a song that kind of took off. And so they were going to go on tour, and they realized that they had no relationship. Their marriage had completely fallen apart. And so rather than going on tour, well, they had a choice. We go on tour and we come back to maybe no relationship at all, or we resolve to sit down and learn this. And so one of their albums, and I'll link it in the show notes, was born out of this really conscious conversation where every night they would sit down, they would open a bottle of wine, and they would talk until it was gone. And they would learn
a bottle of wine every night.
I mean,
Maybe leave.
Yeah,
That is,
that's everyone's got their brand. Everyone's got their brand.
a lot of wine.
But to sit down and have these really conscious conversations about who they were now.
Yeah. Totally.
And their music has changed beautifully. And like, I have such an endearment for their sound because I found them while I was going through my divorce. And it was very evocative to me of like the fact that like, that's not what I have here, is a relationship that is ready to evolve in this way and to sit down and push through. And so like, we don't know what is sitting there for us to learn.
Yeah.
at any given moment. But if we are present with ourselves, then we likely won't miss what is in front of us. And so I think that, invitation just to reconnect again to self
Yeah.
and say, is this serving me as it is? What are my needs? Explore that. And then if and when you feel safe to bring that forward in the dynamic that you're in, to say, okay, here's how.
Yeah.
Here's how to love me. Can you?
Yeah.
How do you want to be loved? What does that look like? And to evolve that together.
Yeah. Lovely.
If this resonated, wonderful. If it didn't, wonderful. And as always, if you have any feedback or questions or curiosities, please reach out to us. Please rate this podcast on, I was going to say on podcast.
On podcast.
On
Rate this
Spotify,
podcast on podcast.
on iTunes, on YouTube. Rate, subscribe, help us out to get the word out. Share this with more people who might need support and care in these ways. So
Okay.
see you next time.
See ya.